Hey, welcome back, everybody. Mark from Rams Up here. I'm going to get back into the roster, the Rams roster this episode. After the minicamp and OTAs, how do I feel about this potential 53-man roster? I update this occasionally, and I thought now would be a good time. Kind of slow in the content lately, and I apologize for that. A lot of things going on the home front, but we'll have this episode obviously followed by a friend of the show joining me in the next day or two to talk Rams football. So we'll take a long look at a potential 53-man roster updated here in late June. How am I feeling about that? And before we do that, we'll get through some news and notes. Episode 768 on the podcast. So I wanted to talk about a player who wore number 68 for our Rams, and we had already talked about Kyle Turley and Richie Incognito, two of the bad boys from Rams history. Boy, those two guys, love to go bar hopping with them. But this episode, I'm going to talk about another guy who wore number 68, and that is another offensive lineman, Jamon Brown. 6'3", 340 pounds out of Louisville. The Rams drafted him in 2015 in the third round, 72nd overall. Started 30 games over 3 years for the Rams, 3+ years. So he was there when McVay came on board. And he had some injuries, had a suspension he had to deal with. And he was a decent guard, but the Rams eventually moved on from him. And interesting guy. He did not play a single snap at guard in college, and that's where the Rams played him. He became entrenched there briefly at right guard. And J.B. Scott had an interesting comment about a year and a half ago, when the Rams drafted K.T. Leviston. Compared Leviston to Jamon Brown, a guy that was probably going to transition to guard in the National Football League. I'm still not sure what Leviston is. Maybe we'll find out in the preseason. But Jamon Brown at number 68 for our Los Angeles Rams. And briefly St. Louis. He played 1 year in St. Louis under Jeff Fisher. So I have a little trivia question here related to Jamon Brown. In that 2017 season, Sean McVay's first year as the Rams coach, what did that offensive line look like? Who were the 5 guys up front? I already gave one of them away for you. I'll share that answer in a second. So get through some news and notes. Okoronkwo was released by the Browns. Remember him, an outside linebacker, edge guy that played for the Rams briefly, so he's a free agent. CBS Sports, they did a look back. Brian DiArdo, anyways, of CBS Sports, did a look back following this last Super Bowl. Who were the greatest Super Bowl offenses? And he did select the 1999 edition of the St. Louis Rams, the greatest show on turf. So they are still number 1 in DiArdo's book. And I'm okay with that assessment. And, Ian talked about just a couple episodes ago about how Puka Nacua is starting to get a lot of recognition across the NFL world, writers, media, and experts, but just how good he is. There's a lot of data analytics coming out about Puka, and PFF noted that his coverage, his rating against coverage, his PFF grade against coverage, man coverage that is, 90.9. That's the 4th overall. It led the league in target rate against man coverage 40% of the time, and yards after the catch against man coverage 211. And then against zone coverage, even better, a 92.3 grade, number 1 overall, and that was a 90.4 Pro Football Focus receiving grade in his rookie 2023 season, and he followed that up with a 92.3 mark, that 92.3 mark this past season. So he was very good his rookie year and even better last year. 71 zone targets at a rate of 36%, the highest in the National Football League. So, You start diving into the data. I know that's a lot of data I just shared with you, but the bottom line, Puka, number 4 against man coverage in the National Football League and number 1 against zone coverage in the National Football League. Pretty impressive. And I got to thinking about Super Bowl winning coaches that are still active in the NFL, and it's a pretty short list. And the reason I bring that up is I think, you know, coaches, if you see your team as a Super Bowl contender, one thing that elevates your chances is having a coach that's proven he can do it, that he can win a Super Bowl. And there are 3 uh, Super Bowl winning coaches in the AFC West at the moment. That's Pete Carroll, did it with the Seahawks. Andy Reid had done it multiple times with the most recently with the Chiefs, of course. And then Sean Payton, the Broncos coach, who did it with the Saints. There are 2 in the AFC North. That would be Tomlin and Harbaugh, and only 2 in the NFC, and that would be Nick Sirianni and our Sean McVay. So, I think that, makes you have to think that the Rams and the Eagles, makes sense that you would pick them as potential Super Bowl teams, Super Bowl winning teams this year, just by the fact that they have coaches that have done it before. And they're the only coaches in the NFC West, in the NFC, I should say, that have won Super Bowls. And final note, the Rams signed quarterback Dresser Wynn once again, the 3rd straight year they brought him in. And this makes sense. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times that I thought they'd bring in a camp arm. I thought they'd bring in a camp leg too. But Dresser Wynn is going to get a lot of action in camp. They're going to try to rest Matthew Stafford to some degree, and even Jimmy G. And once the preseason rolls around, we might see Jimmy G a little bit. Wouldn't be surprised if we didn't. Can't expect Stetson Bennett to go every down of all 3 preseason games, but maybe he will. But if something happens to him, we don't want to have to go back to one of our 2 main guys on an emergency basis in a preseason game. So enter Dresser Wynn. Now let's get into my roster. Oh, before I move on, the answer to my trivia question, who is the Rams starting offensive line in 2017? Well, I gave Jamon Brown away as our right guard. And, we know Rob Havenstein, he's been there since the Eisenhower administration. So, yes, he was the right tackle. Andrew Whitworth, he was that big free agent ad. He was our left tackle. And then Roger Saffold was still here. He was our left guard. And John Sullivan was the center. And I think I've talked about most of these guys at one point or another in our uniform series. And I don't think we've talked about Whitworth, but that's it. Whitworth, Saffold, Sullivan, Brown, and Havenstein. That was that offensive line. Now, Rams offensive line in McVay's first year with the Rams. Now let's get into that roster discussion. I'm not calling this a roster lock discussion. I tried to do that last time, and I was throwing percentages out there, and people got a little confused. I was being too trying to provide too much fidelity as far as the chances of various players to make the roster. So I'm not doing that this time. But I will talk through each position group, and we will start with the quarterbacks. And I got 2 quarterbacks, 2 and only 2, Matthew Stafford and Jimmy G. Now, where is Stetson Bennett? I originally had him, I think, as a 50% shot at making this roster. And as I go through this 53-man roster, if Stetson Bennett is on this roster, man, you're cutting a really good player, an important player, potentially important player in the secondary, offensive line, some other positions. I just think they're going to try to sneak him onto the practice squad. Now, if he lights it up in the preseason, it maybe changes it a little bit, but I don't think the Rams, they don't use the preseason games, the results and the performance in preseason games as a big part of their decision-making process. That's just not what they do. So I'm going with 2 quarterbacks. Now we move on to the running backs. Pretty straightforward. I think it's these 4 guys: Kyron Williams, Blake Corum, Jarquez Hunter, and Ronnie Rivers. I think Schrader will end up on the practice squad, as well as we have an undrafted free agent and maybe a late emerging player, a late add, who knows, that gets on that practice squad. Sometimes you add guys to the practice squad after other teams make their cuts. I think Schrader would be on the practice squad for sure. These are my 4 running backs. And by the way, this will add up to 53. I'm not going to add them up as we go, but we have 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, and then we're moving on to the tight ends and 4 guys here as well. I thought that they might go with 3, but if they're really talking about 12 personnel, they're going to go with 4, and Terrence Ferguson, Tyler Higbee, Colby Parkinson, and Davis Allen are the guys. Pretty solid tight end group. And, we had originally discussed, maybe that was my not so great idea of maybe releasing Colby Parkinson. I'm not the only one that thought that was a possibility, but weighing that against the likelihood they're going to go 12 personnel more, Colby Parkinson is a good blocker. Probably needs to use his physical advantages more than we saw last year in the run game and the passing game for that matter. But those are my 4 tight ends. Let's move on to the offensive line, and this gets a little bit tricky. So this is working under the assumption that Alaric Jackson is not on the 53-man roster. If he is, obviously changes things. I'm just kind of deducing he's not going to be ready to go, as sad as that is. But, his health in mind, it's probably a good thing. So offensive line, I got DJ Humphries and Rob Havenstein as the starters. At guard, Kevin Dotson and Steve Avila. And then at center, Coleman Shelton, backed up by Bo Limmer. And then 3 additional backups in addition to Limmer: Justin Dietich, Warren McClendon, and David Quisenberry. I think McClendon and Quisenberry can back up the tackle positions. McClendon has some flexibility there, and Dietich would be the first man up at one of the guard positions. And yes, only 9 offensive linemen here, and I know there's probably going to be some disagreement on that. I'd love to go 10, especially with Alaric out. But, it would have to be at the expense of another position, obviously. I've already limited it to 2 quarterbacks. Yeah, I just don't know where we can buy another a slot for this offensive line. You'll see what I mean as we walk through this. How do I feel about this offensive line? Well, if Humphries is up to the task, we'll be fine. I'm not convinced that he is. But the Rams will get him coached up, and if he's fully back from that torn ACL, he could be much better than a lot of Ram fans are predicting. On to the wide receivers, and Nakua and Devontae are the 2 main guys. Obviously, Whittington and Atwell, 2 respectable number 3 and 4 wide receivers. And then I think Muntfield makes this 53-man roster, leaving us a decision to make: Xavier Smith or Britton Covey. Now, I know a lot of folks, including Ian, are convinced they assigned Covey to be a big part of this return game, especially with the rule changes. I don't think they can carry Smith and Covey. Now, I understand Covey is more of a special teams specialist than a wide receiver, and that was kind of Smith's role as well, right? So I don't think they carry both these guys. I just don't think it makes sense. Now, moving on to the special teams: Joshua Carty, Ethan Evans, and Alex Ward. Not much to discuss there. Pretty solid, if unspectacular. And maybe, if we see more of what we saw late in the year from Evans and Carty, maybe we'll be characterizing it as spectacular at the end of the year. Defensive line, I have 6 defensive linemen: Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, and Poona Ford. second-year player Tyler Davis and rookie Ty Hamilton. And then Deshaun Johnson or Laurel Murchison. I'm leaning towards Murchison. I think he provides more flexibility. I think he's stronger against the run. Deshaun, I think, has some limitations. Both of them have played well when given the opportunities. I don't think we go with 7 defensive linemen, though. On the edge, kind of the same deal. I think we know who our 4 main guys are: Jared Verse, Byron Young, Josiah Stewart, and Brennan Jackson. Unfortunately, Stewart and Jackson, a little bit unknown what they bring to the table. And I think we actually know more about Nick Hampton and Keir Thomas. And I think Thomas and Hampton will be battling for that 5th spot. Hampton, my money would be on him, but he's coming back from a serious injury. Keir Thomas, well, we'll see. I think it's going to be one of those 2 guys, though, unless Brennan Jackson really just, McVay tried to pump up his assessment of him recently in a press conference. So maybe Jackson is on the trajectory to be part of this rotation. I think we'll see him in the preseason. We'll probably see all 3 of these guys, all 4 of them perhaps, Stewart, Jackson, Thomas, and Hampton. Someone's going to emerge as the 4th and 5th guy. My money is on Verse, Young, Stewart, Jackson, and Hampton. Again, depending on how if Hampton is fully recovered from that injury. Next up, the inside linebackers, Spates, Landman, and Pooh Paul are on this 53-man roster for sure. And I think Sean Dolak is trying to end Troy Reeder's time with the Rams. And Reeder just, will not go away, and give him credit for that. Rams love him for from some very specific reasons. One of them being the ability to lead that defense, call the defense, wear the green dot, locker room presence, I'm sure, as well. So we'll see. I know a lot of folks saying Reeder has no shot at making this roster, and I beg to differ. Sean Dolak is going to have to prove he can, run the field at the NFL level. I think he can, based on, his resume at the University of Buffalo, what he did there. Really talented guy. Surprised he didn't get drafted, but it's going to be a battle, I think, between those 2. And the cornerbacks, we'll go with Akilla Witherspoon and Darius Williams, Kobe Durant and Emmanuel Forbes, and then a 5th guy. And this is where the Rams may have some flexibility. I'm not listing Quentin Lake here, and maybe I should just list defensive backs. And Quentin Lake plays more cornerback than he does safety, at least last year. But let's just set aside Quentin Lake for a moment. And let's say the Rams go with 5 cornerbacks. And this is where the Rams could buy a spot if they wanted to carry a 10th offensive lineman. They wanted to carry Xavier Smith and Britton Covey. They could carry just those 4 cornerbacks I mentioned: Witherspoon, Williams, Durant, Forbes, and throw in Quentin Lake. But battling for a 5th spot under this scenario, I have Sean Jolly, Darion Kendricks, Charles Woods, Josh Wallace. And if they bring on Ramsey, I still think they would carry Ramsey and those 4, Witherspoon, Williams, Durant, Forbes, and Lake. I know it gets messy. Ramsey could be more the star position. Maybe Quentin Lake becomes a pure safety in this scenario. But that's how I'm calling the cornerback spot on this roster. The 4 guys: Witherspoon, Williams, Durant, and Forbes, and potentially one of these guys, or Ramsey, one of these guys being Jolly, Kendricks, Woods, Wallace, and Ramsey. Quentin Lake, we'll talk about him in a second. We'll talk about him right now. We have Cameron Curl, Cam Kinchins, Quentin Lake, and Jalen McCullough. And I get it, Lake, maybe not shouldn't be listed here as a safety. It just gets complicated because of the Ramsey deal. So maybe, just maybe, they don't carry a 5th safety. In this scenario, I'm saying Tanner Engel or Nate Varcarcel, or someone else. I think the John Johnson train has left the station and he will not be at it. So this is where the one area where the Rams have some flexibility to mix it up a little bit. If they were to add Ramsey, they could potentially just carry Curl Kinchens, Lake, and McCullough for safeties in name, and then you go back to that cornerback group and you carry just Witherspoon, Williams, Durant, Forbes, and Ramsey. So basically 9 defensive backs. I think that's what could happen. And if they did that, you can add a 10th offensive lineman, I think is what I would expect them to do, as opposed to carrying Xavier Smith and Britton Covey. So I know, pretty messy, especially on audio, pretty hard to follow. But what I'm saying is I'm calling 10 defensive backs here. But if they added Ramsey, I could see them going 9. Even if they didn't add Ramsey, maybe go 9 defensive backs and add that extra offensive lineman. So that's my 53-man roster. I didn't count that through as we went, but I think you got it. Hopefully you got it. We'll revisit this again. Just fun times to be a Rams fan. This roster, you go through this 53-man roster, some really good players not making it, right? Really solid roster from top to bottom. No glaring weaknesses. A little concerned about left tackle right now, obviously with the Alaric Jackson situation, and maybe a little concerned about the top end of our cornerback group. But other than that, pretty darn good 53-man roster. That's how I feel anyways here.